Hello everyone, Ember Power here, and welcome back to a new video. In this one, I'm going to be taking a look at a first deck profile on Pokemon TCG Live, and that is going to be the Mustard Sauce. So initially, I was a bit skeptical about this deck, and I wasn't really going to try it out, at least not initially, because, there's so many new decks coming out with Scarlet and Violet. Not all of them great, but, definitely some interesting decks, including, like Arcanine and the new Crydon and Maridon, so plenty of interesting decks, but Mustard Sauce was kind of on the radar, partially because another YouTuber, 10 Types, has been raving about the Skwovet for so long. I was kind of like, okay, gotta check this out at some point. And then when I opened up the new Battle Pass for just starting out the new ladder and stuff for Scarlet and Violet, I did actually pull a Skwovet character rare, and I thought, well, not a character rare, alt-art rare, whatever you call them. And then I decided, you know what, might as well give this a go. And then I ended up being really surprised with just how strong this deck is. So Skwovet has the ability Nest Dash. It says once your turn, you may shuffle your hand and put it onto the bottom of your deck. If you do this, draw a card. Now, initially, this sounds awful, right? Because in most situations, you're going to lose your massive hand, massive hand size, 7, 6, 5 cards or whatever. Just to draw one measly card is absolutely pathetic. It's outclassed immediately by Pyukumuku. However, Skwovet is really good for comboing with Mustard. So if I just scroll down all the way down here, because Pokemon Live refuses to add a full deck viewer for some reason, is we have the Single Strike Mustard from the Battle Styles set. So Mustard says you can only play this card when it's the last card in your hand. So what we're going to try and do is Skwovet to draw the Single Strike Mustard. And then what we can do after that is search our deck for any Single Strike Pokemon, so it can be a Stage 2 or a Stage 1, and put it onto your bench. Then we get to draw 5 cards. So it's kind of a pseudo draw supporter, but also pseudo Pokemon Surge. And how we can guarantee a Single Strike Pokemon is with Altaria. So Altaria has the ability Tempting Tune that says once in your turn, you may search your deck for a supporter card, reveal it, shuffle your deck, then put that card on top of it. And then it also has Free Retreat, which is worth mentioning because it's just kind of important in this deck to have a pivot, but, kind of important. We also have the ability Tempting Tune basically means we can guarantee Mustard and then use Skwovet to draw into that Mustard, and then we can get the Single Strike Pokemon from the deck, and then we can draw 5 cards. So the Single Strike Pokemon we're going to be grabbing is Cinderace. It's a Single Strike Pokemon with 170 HP from Chilling Reign, so pretty tanky single price attacker. Has the ability Crisis Power that says this Pokemon's attacks do 30 more damage to your opponent's active Pokemon for each prize card your opponent has taken. And then Fireball Shot does 150, and during your next turn, this Pokemon can attack, which isn't really a relevant effect because 9 times out of 10, Cinderace is still getting 1-hit KO'd because, power creep. So, realistically, we want to try and use Cinderace after we force our opponent to knock out our first Entei V. So, Fireball Shot should be doing 150 to 180 and then up to 210. So, that is pretty solid in terms of damage output. And it basically means that we'll be 10 damage painfully short of knocking out Maridon. But don't worry, we do, if I remember to include it, yes I did, we do have 1 copy of Defiant Band. So this will allow you to increase your damage by plus 30 if you're behind on prize cards. You can include that if you really think you need it. I personally am toying between including Defiant Band and not including it. But because I also play 3 copies of Arven in this deck, because I'm trying to use Arven as our early game way of setting up and finding all our resources, Arven does kind of make sense to play one of Defiant Band as well, because Arven can obviously find a tool card and an item. So Arven is here for precisely that reason. He's just going to find an item and a tool card. And it basically means that we can find our one-off switches, ropes, energy search, even one of our 3 battle VIP passes, a nest ball if we need it, as well as either a Defiant Band or an EXP share. So EXP share is just going to help maintain some energy on the board. We do play Magma Basin, so it's possible to get Cinderace up in 1 turn after we use Mustard. But EXP share will just help with keeping energy on the board. We can use it to attach to a next Entei, and then once the Cinderace gets knocked out, we just need a manual attachment. Or, if we don't have the EXP share, then we have to promote Altaria, because that's Free Retreat. Then we can use the Basin, manual attachment, and get Entei going again. So I haven't really talked about the big dog himself. 230 HP is very, very convenient because Maridon naturally does 220. Now, Miraidon is typically paired with Regieleki VMAX to do plus 30 more anyway, but still, there will be games and turns where the opponent doesn't quite get there in the turn that they need to get there. So what ends up happening is they do 220, and then you can then prize trade effectively with them, because Burning Rondo can also take one-hit KOs fairly rarely against smarter players, but this is TCG Live we're talking about, and not everyone is very conscious about this damage output. It does also have the ability Fleet-Footed. It says once in your turn, if this Pokemon is in the active spot, you may draw a card. So there is again synergy with the Altaria and the Skwovet. So it is possible, to, if we don't get the Skwovet, to Altaria for Mustard. If we have a 0-card hand effectively, we can play our cards in hand, and then we can use Burning Rondo to draw the Mustard. And this was basically the only way of playing Mustard pre-Scarlet and Violet. But Skwovet really is helpful with Nest Dash, and it should mean that, we can get there a lot more consistently. As for the other Pokemon in the deck, there's only really a few more to talk about. We have a 2-2 line of Bidoof Bibarel. Bibarel has the ability Industrious Sizers. Once in your turn, you may draw until you have 5 cards in your hand. Typically, I would pair Entei with Revavroom because Revavroom just offers a bit more synergy with Magma Basin, which I think is important for the deck. However, Revavroom requires you to discard an energy from hand, and if we're having to use Skwovet or even Altaria potentially to thin out hand, then if we use Skwovet, then we can't then discard an energy to drop 6, if that makes sense. So we have to use Bibarel after we use Skwovet in combination. So Bibarel is obviously just like a helpful draw engine throughout the game. We don't necessarily need to do Mustard turns like all the time. So having Bibarel there to constantly draw cards is pretty useful. It's also pretty easy to shift in this deck because we play 2 Rope, 1 Switch, 3 Arven, so that's kind of our switching outs. And yeah, it doesn't usually get stuck in the active. I've not had too many games where Bibarel just gets stranded for a few turns, and that was definitely a problem in some other decks, like the Arceus World Champions deck. People just boss Bibarel and it gets stuck. But thankfully, because we play 3 switch outs, we should be fine. We also play 1 copy of Radiant Charizard, which is going to be a similar style late game attacker to Cinderace. Cinderace is very, very powerful in the late game, so is Radiant Charizard. The difference is Radiant Charizard is a basic. Now, we do play 4 copies of Nest Ball, so we can Nest Ball for Radiant Charizard in the very, very late game if we need it. I haven't really needed Radiant Charizard just yet in most matches, so it's like debatable if you could maybe even cut this for Radiant Greninja just to have even more discard pile synergy with Magma Basin. And Radiant Greninja is obviously going to be passive bench sitter throughout the game and essentially act as a mini draw supporter, which is really nice. So there is an argument that maybe you don't even need Radiant Charizard in this deck, but I think currently it just makes so much sense given the fact that you want your opponent to eventually knock out 2 NTVs and a Cinderace, or 1 Entei and then something else, and then maybe 1 or 2 Cinderace and a Radiant Zard or something like that. Prize mapping does get a wee bit strange, but you want to force the opponent to always knock out a Cinderace. And the cool thing about this deck is that if you lead with Entei and you force the opponent to knock out Entei, you can then force the opponent to knock out Cinderace while then promoting Altaria to then Magma Basin to the next Entei and Mani Attach. So hopefully you should never have to put yourself in a position where your opponent can boss KO another Entei, if that makes sense. So you can attack with Cinderace, promote Altaria the following turn, and then bench Entei. So you have this kind of extra protection. Anything else in the list, I would say, is kind of just self-explanatory. Like we're playing 4 Ultra Ball because it needs that discard synergy. Can help with thinning the hand. 4 Magma Basin because that's basically how this whole combo works as well. 3 Arven, I guess this is like a subjective supporter choice. You could play something like Judge in this position, or maybe more items like trekking shoes or something. But I just found Arven to be super useful in the early game. It also means we can get away with running less copies of Battle VIP Pass, because if we open with an Arven, we can then for Arven for a VIP Pass anyway. So yeah, I really like Arven. I think it's very solid in this deck. Also played 3 boss. I was trying 2 boss at one point. I just didn't like it. Don't have room for 4, but 3 is good. 4 research because we want a thin out hand. And then 1 Raihan. Admittedly, I don't think you need Raihan. I'm going to be truthfully. I don't think you need Raihan. Maybe a Choice Spell or another Defiant Band. Maybe even a second EXP share over a Raihan might be better. But I'm just leaving it in the deck for now because it does have somewhat decent synergy with Entei and Charizard's attack cost, as well as, I guess, Cinderace. But likely, if you're having to Raihan to Cinderace, something has gone very, very wrong. So yeah, that's a deck profile. If you're interested in learning more about Skwovet, I would just recommend watching 10 Types. He's a big fanatic about Skwovet, and I wouldn't be surprised if he publishes 10 videos in the next 2 months, all about Skwovet, and then for the next 3 months, all about Skwovet. So yeah, I would recommend checking that out. But yeah, it's been Emra Power. Thanks for checking out the mustard sauce, and yeah, hopefully see you next time. Thank you for watching.